You're listening to Salford City Radio, 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate on this show to have some of the world's best athletes, sports people who participate in a variety of different sports: football, footballers, coaches, trainers, sports psychologists. And we also have a segment featuring some of the world's leading professionals in the field of psychology and related fields who give us a really interesting insight into their take into all issues related to psychology. And we're very fortunate on the show to have had some really fascinating guests and to share some of the ideas. And today we have a really fascinating guest who's going to really give us an invaluable insight, an interesting insight into his field and his PhD in and around social psychology. I'm sure he'll be able to explain a lot better than I can, but he sort of specialises in critical psychology, cultural psychology, which I think is going to be fascinating for us as an audience and as an interview. I've been really looking forward to doing this show and finding out a bit more about his work and a sort of really important topic that we're going to cover today from a social point of view. So, Mvikeli Ncube, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on board. And I suppose before we sort of, go into the depths of the interview, Mvikeli, just give our listeners a bit of an insight into your sort of background, how you got into psychology, and maybe tell us a bit more about your PhD and also, you work for Acton University and you're visiting fellow at Manchester Metropolitan Uni. So can you give us a bit of a background? Where did it sort of all begin for you, psychology?
Yeah, well, how I got into psychology is very interesting. I started off as a primary school teacher. I'm a qualified primary school teacher, but I did my training in Africa, in Zimbabwe. So when I came to the UK around 2008, I wanted to continue working as a teacher here in the UK. I discovered that my qualification was not really recognized here. I had to do a bit more work. But I had my first encounter with psychology when I was doing my teacher training in Zimbabwe. So there was a module in psychology, another one in philosophy, and another in sociology. So I decided, let me just do a module in psychology. Then it was during that time when I was doing my undergraduate degree in Leeds Metropolitan University. They have changed their name now. I think they are called Leeds Beckett.
That's right.
In one of the lectures one day, that lecture was a game changer for me. I was doing my second year in my psychology degree. On that day, we're doing a lesson in a module called evolutionary psychology. Then the lecturer comes in, introduces the lesson, but then she had some concepts that she was focusing on. For example, the issues around intelligence, happiness, and the issues around eugenics, and how these things are biologically inherited. When she mentioned those ideas, I totally disagreed with them, and I felt something must be wrong, and I wanted to do a bit more to know about those ideas. So, and to find a way or a platform to challenge them, because I did not agree with them. So what I did is, you can imagine by then I did not know as much as I do now. So what I did is I did a dissertation that was utilizing identical twins, because the ideas that she raised were taking their basis in studies that were that utilize identical twins. So in doing that, in the process of doing that, instead of getting answers, I got more questions, Jimmy, not answers. Then later on, I took my dissertation to Leeds Metropolitan University. I did not do a master's, I just took that and I said, look, I would like to do a PhD on this and I want to pursue these questions further, because I think there is a lot of academic debates that can go into this. They say to me, okay, you write a proposal, you send it to us, we're going to do an interview with you. And I did that, and luckily they accepted me. So that's how I got into psychology. Maybe I can talk later about the kind of ideas that I explored and the kind of things that I do a bit later. But that's how I got into psychology, and I opted to do, to use qualitative research methods, because the ideas that I wanted to challenge were in mainstream psychology. So I wanted to look at something which is an alternative to what was already there. So that's how I got into psychology and into what I'm doing now.
Yeah, that's really fascinating how you got into it and the sort of path you've taken and are taking. And maybe would it be okay to share some of the ideas that you had? I mean, in terms of mainstream, where do you sort of see it from your perspective, Mvikeli, mainstream psychology in the 21st century?
Well, I see it being challenged, and I see it being challenged further, as time progresses. I'll tell you why, Jimmy. I'll give you a number of reasons. I'm one of the scholars on the side of challenging mainstream psychology. Number one, if you look at how research is done in mainstream psychology, it does not describe the phenomena from the point of view of those experiencing it. The researchers claim that the data speaks for itself, but I don't think so. I really don't think data speaks for itself, because when you do research, Jimmy, you ask questions, you ask people questions. You decide which questions to ask, and you decide which people to ask. You also write the analysis and the report. You cannot then turn around and say, well, look, this is purely objective. Data is speaking for itself. I think there is a bit of some element of not being really honest, So as a result, we have got alternative approaches that are very influential that have come up, like discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, social constructionism, conversation analysis. All these approaches are saying, wait a minute, let's take a break and suggest a different way of doing research. So while mainstream psychology is strong and continuing, I don't see it continuing as the dominant perspective in psychology.
That's really interesting you say, and I'm just sort of, something resonates that you mentioned there, Mvikeli, and I just want to see your sort of take on this. And for me, I've studied mindfulness for a long time now, and I've looked at the Eastern, philosophy and Western secular mindfulness, and in a way, I mean, I'm a big advocate. I think mindfulness is great for some people. It can work really well. But I felt in my own journey, studying it from a Western secular perspective, it almost took away some of the original concepts. Now, I know you've got to adapt it in the modern world. You can't sort of drop in, 4,000, 5,000-year-old traditions into the modern world. I can appreciate that. But I felt that in the scientific validation process, some of it was lost, really. That's just sort of my opinion. But do you find sometimes that, from that perspective, in terms of the way we sort of are encouraged in sort of from a scientific point of view, sometimes we lose the concept of the phenomena itself?
I really do, and more than that, I think there is a strong possibility of misrepresenting people that we're seeking to represent.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I really think like that.
That's a great point. And sort of in terms of yourself, I mean, what do you see? I mean, you've already done some impressive work, and I no doubt you've got many more goals and your own sort of moving forward. But what's your sort of vision? What would you like to see? I mean, tell us about your sort of thoughts on sort of inclusion in psychology. How do you sort of see that in the world we live in today?
Right. If you ask me what I would like to see, Jimmy, I've got quite a number of things that I would like to to say, number one, because all varieties of psychology are culturally and historically constructed, there is a need for alternative varieties of psychology to confirm or at least resist the ideological assumptions in mainstream models. So I would like to see a bit more of this. And also, rather than straightforward accounts of natural facts, I would like to see further voices from the cultural psychology perspective, that emphasizes that conventional scientific wisdom will kind of reflect and promote the interest of the few. And the few that I'm talking about, as a scholar, you will know. In this case, is the, in psychology, they are called the weird. The weird, that word is used to refer to the white, the educated, the industrialized, the rich, and the democratic. So my question is, my point is, I would like to see a version of psychology that is not centered, that does not conceptualize the realities of the whole world on the basis of this small group. But I would like to see multicultural perspectives which are contextualized in different regions and different parts of the world. I don't think it's fair to conceptualize, to take Western concepts, for example. Psychology is a Western concept. It was developed in the US and in Europe, right? The people who develop these psychological concepts, they have never been, maybe some of them have never been to India or Africa or China. But my argument is, unless you go into those people and sit down with them and see how they live their everyday life and understand their language and culture, you will not fully understand them to conceptualize or to develop realities for them.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point you make there. And certainly in my own journey of learning, I've reflected on some of these things myself, and some of the things I've sort of reflected on, Mvikeli, I'd like to see your thoughts on this, is for example, psychology is a new field in one sense, but it's been very heavily influenced by, you could say, white middle class, Europe, America, who've got a perspective, and at that point too, I think it's important to note that the world, I suppose, was a smaller place than it is now. Now we've got more accessibility. But at that point, you kind of think, okay, you dig a bit deeper in the theories, and I suppose in saying that too, when you think that, like for example, some of the ideas you can sort of trace back to, ancient Greece or Buddhism or different religions, and you kind of think, okay, well, we're sort of seeing it from a very minimal lens, but how can we achieve that? How can we sort of broaden our horizons? And I think we've got a long way to go in that field, but what can we do to sort of start moving forward?
Well, Jimmy, we do have a long way. I think you phrased it right. Can't be said better. We do have a long way. I think what we need, others may see it different, but I think what we need is, especially here in the UK, I think what we need is a multicultural BPS, because that's the main governing board for psychology in the UK. So if you are going to talk about doing that, I think we need to start from where we are. If you say, what can we do in the UK? I'll say, I think we need more non-white voices in the BPS. We need more scholars from the minority groups coming in. You see, when you write articles and write books and publish very good articles, that's a contribution that can make a change. However, that's not enough. You need to come and sit down in the table and have a discussion with people that have got influence on what is taught and how it is taught. There is a book, very interesting book. You might have heard about Fanon. Maybe not, but I think you might have heard about him. He's very influential. He wrote a very good, classic book, challenging, the concepts in psychology, in particular, how those concepts are so typically Western biased. But maybe you never read about him in any of your psychology modules. Maybe you never had his book used as the main text in any of the modules that you did. So somebody like me will ask a question. Does writing a good book or a journal article really help to change things? The answer is it does, but to a minimal extent, because that book can still be ignored.
Absolutely,
that article can still be ignored. But if I get into the BPS and sit down with people that influence what we teach, that influence the version of psychology that we have here in the UK, I think I can do more. I can complement my scholarly work, my publications and the ideas I present in conferences by then sitting down in meetings and talking to people and reasoning with them. I really liked the November article, the magazine that came out from the BPS that explicitly said psychology is still racist. But I don't expect, white people who do not, because it's one thing to be, it's one thing for people not to be racist, but it's another thing to be able to, to fit into somebody's shoes and change things into their favor. In other words, what I'm saying, Jimmy, is no one can represent me better than myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this minority group, these scholars from minority groups, they need to get into the BPS and be able to sit in meetings and have those constructive debates and discussions on how things can be changed and why things need to be changed. So, for me, one of the things that I'm really keen on seeing a change on is the silence history in psychology. If you know the work of people like Francis Galton, for example, or people like Haynes Ainsworth, their work has since been proved not to be science, but to be more of political arguments and political agendas. But as long as that history is silenced to our students today, it will look like, it's science because it's still there in psychology books. These are kind of things that we need to sit down and have debates about.
No, absolutely. So we need some, evolution in the field. That's for sure, and it's really interesting you say, and that's some interesting points. And what I find really interesting too, Mvikeli, is how throughout the last century the ideas of Western psychology have sort of been taken to different parts around the world. And I kind of think, and I sort of thought about that a while ago, and I thought, for me, I think that some of the people who sort of were influential in the field of psychology in the Western world, who went to different countries, probably brought more back with them than took over there, if that makes any sense. Like the likes of, say, a Rogers who went out to China, and I think there's a lot to be learned from different cultures, the way they perceive things, and we're kind of at a point now. We've got the sort of the diagnostic criteria, which obviously is useful to a point, but it doesn't probably always translate well to the way other people see the world. And I think there needs to be a lot more respect about
definitely. You know, if you were to go to India now, Jimmy, and you can bring back whatever you bring back, but you will not put it across in a way that reflects the Indians.
Absolutely.
Because you are not Indians. You are not an Indian. You are a white British. And then your culture also, which impacts your philosophy and your way of seeing the world, will impact on how you report on what you brought back from India.
Absolutely.
So the best thing for me will be to say, let's have academics in India having their own journals and writing their own psychology, you know, constructing their own realities from their own perspective, you know, from their own cultural resources. I think that would be one of the best ways to move things forward.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful stuff, you know, interesting stuff, really, that you mentioned there. And, you know, what's your sort of vision, Mvikeli, going forward? I mean, the work you're doing is you know, really really fascinating, I think, and you've got some great ideas. I think it's really interesting. You know, we need more Mvikelis out there to present these ideas and have these discussions and have these sort of debates. But what's your sort of vision going forward? Obviously, you know, you're one person, but you know, one person can make a big difference. That's for sure. But you know, sort of, where do you sort of see yourself going forward? Your vision?
Well, my vision is to you know, promote more critical voices in psychology, promote alternative understandings of what has been there, and I've already started doing that. I published a book in 2018 from a social constructionist perspective. Social constructionism is one of the strong alternatives, really, to that challenges the mainstream psychology. It challenges the view that the world is objectively described. It's rather say that the world is subjectively described. And realities are not objectively observed, but realities are created instead. You know, so with that, I am bringing in a different understanding to what has always been there, and I'm keen on seeing more work in those areas, aiming to write a bit more, you know, speak in conferences. I'm aiming to speak in 3 this year. You know, and also network with like-minded scholars, learn from them, luckily from what they've done, and see how I can develop my own work, you know, on the basis of what I learned from others who have been there before me.
That's really interesting. And how has your work been received thus far, Mvikeli? What's been the sort of, you know, reaction to some of your ideas from different scholars?
Well, you get both. You get people who appreciate your work. Obviously, people who do qualitative research and people who do, you know, critical work. To them, that was an excellent piece of work. And to people who are on the other side, you know, they might feel like their work is being undermined or their work is being attacked. But really, it's not an attack. It's a way of saying, how about we think of things this way and this way and this way? Yeah, the book was published by Routledge, and it was published in the UK and also in the US, and they distributed copies, you know, all over the world. I don't know about the impact of the book in other parts of the world, but here in the UK, it has really done so well.
Fantastic. And how can people get the book who are listening, Mvikeli? Is there a way that they can access the book, purchase the book, or get a hold of the book?
Yeah, quite easily. The book is everywhere online. If you just go online and write my name, or you just write the social construction of twin identity.
Your social construction. Brilliant.
Yeah, the book will easily come.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. And I suppose, on another note, as you're aware, I have another role, a co-editor of the North of England Bulletin. If anyone sort of can review some of the books you mentioned today and that book, that'd be great to get it out there. We'd certainly consider, publishing it in the Bulletin. That'd be great. I'll run it by the co-editor. It'd be fantastic. We could do that if we've got, we get a lot of different listeners on the show, and that'd be fantastic if we could sort of. And I think you made a really good point there, Kelly. Well, obviously there will be people who sort of feel, maybe it's a bit of an attack. But in saying that, I think that it's got to be that sort of sense of security. And I think that in this field, the only way we're going to progress is by having these open discussions and being comfortable with ideas sort of, challenged. And I must admit, I have to admit, because you make a really good point there, where there's been times that when I've critiqued different models, and I even critique the models I use, because I think it's healthy to do that, that sort of people sort of can take it the wrong way and think, well, why are you saying that for? Why are you challenging Winnicott? Why are you challenging Bowlby? But I think if we don't challenge it, then we're not going to move forward. It's I think it's important.
Intellectual debates are very important to me. If we're going to develop, if we're going to move forward, if we're going to be better, we must be open to debates. We must be open to criticism, and we should take it positive, and we should say, instead of responding with emotions, we should respond with our intellect. That's how we're going to get things forward.
Yeah, and absolutely. Now, it's been really interesting, and just I suppose on a final note, Mvikeli, if there's anyone sort of looking to get into the field in social psychology, or sort of anyone of any age, maybe young person thinking I'm sort of considering studying psychology, or anyone any age maybe looking for a career change, or just looking to learn in general, what would you say? Obviously, you had we've all had different paths. To our own sort of different careers. But what would you say to anyone sort of listening, thinking, well, maybe I want to pursue, learning? What would any sort of, it's difficult to give advice, but what sort of words would you say? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the things that, they can sort of look out for and take in consideration in making their sort of choice?
I think really especially in these days, these unprecedented days that we live in, I think self-motivation is key, because you might have to study online. There won't be anybody telling you to do stuff. You have to, set your own priorities, set your own deadlines. We have to really self-manage. So I think self-motivation, the ability to motivate yourself, will be a great quality to have. And again, familiarizing yourself with digital environments, digital learning environments, will be another great thing to do. And of course, if somebody wanted to do, a degree in psychology, if you did maybe A levels, if you did psychology, that gives you access to getting into a psychology degree. If you have done maybe a diploma, like I did a diploma in education, that's how I got into psychology. But I believe there are many more diplomas that can be accepted as a pathway to a degree in psychology. And also there are a few other degrees other than psychology which can lead into a psychology PhD. Things like social work, sociology, all those social sciences that are closer to psychology. Somebody can move from that, either from a master's degree in social work or sociology or philosophy or anthropology, and end up doing a PhD in psychology.
Absolutely. And in terms of yourself, your sort of PhD, what would you say was the most sort of significant thing for you in doing the research, Mvikeli?
It's a few things. I think it's a few things really. The ability to study independently. There is a lot of reading to do on your own. There is a lot of research to do on your own, and it takes time. Doing a PhD is like somebody taking you to a restaurant and giving you the whole elephant and say, I want you to eat this. You look at it and you say, how do I eat the whole elephant?
Yeah.
It's one bite at a time. It's not going to happen within an hour. It's going to take a lot of time. So I think really qualities like determination, self-motivation, patience. There was a time I thought, this is not ending. I might as well, just leave it. But I thought of the work I had done, and also, my family, I got encouragement. I continued. Brilliant. So I think really that determination is very, very, very important for a PhD.
Absolutely, and that's sort of really interesting. Sort of you mentioned there obviously the motivation, the desire to want to do it, and that's for sure. That's really for anyone listening, considering that it's an important message to take and take it step by step. That 1,000-mile journey is taken one step at a time, really. But it's been really fascinating speaking to you, Mvikeli. I'm sure the listeners, have sort of, taken a lot away and got a really interesting insight. In terms of any of the listeners, perhaps if there's sort of anything you spoke about today, would like to contact you via email, if they've got, maybe there's any opportunities to sort of talk about some of the research you've done further, is there a way for them, Mvikeli, to maybe get in touch with you via email if they've got anything they'd like to sort of, talk to you about from a professional point of view?
Yes, my email address is available on my LinkedIn account and also on my profile on Google Scholar. So if you look for my name on Google Scholar or on LinkedIn, you can get my email address there, and we can take it from there.
Fantastic. No, that's really great. So I really want to thank you, Mvikeli, for coming on board the show. It's been really fascinating. I'm sure the listeners have really, taken a lot away and some really interesting insights. And, you're obviously doing some great work, and we'll definitely, keep an eye out for more developments for what you're doing. So thanks again, Mvikeli, for coming on board the show.
Well, I enjoyed it, Jimmy. Thank you so very much, for offering me the opportunity to speak to you and for hosting me in the radio. And many thanks to all our listeners. Really appreciate everyone for taking their time to tune in today. Brilliant.
Thanks, Mvikeli. That was Mvikeli Ncube, who he works for Acton University. He's a visiting fellow at Manchester Metropolitan University, he specialises in studies in social psychology, critical psychology, cultural psychology. Gives us a really fascinating insight into his work, and really, really interesting stuff. And certainly, if you get an opportunity to get out there and get the book, read it, and obviously, think about it. That's what life is all about, thinking and learning. And just listening to Salford City Radio 94.5 FM, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world.